Hi, Madhushanka. Very happy to see you've got more essays for us. So let's take a look at what you've done here. We've got the pie chart about the German school subjects. So let's take a look and see what you wrote here. Okay. The This pie chart, basically, we call them line graphs, and then the other ones are called pie charts, bar charts. So yeah, you can't say pie graph. It's a wrong expression. Okay. So this pie chart shows the popularity of various school subjects in Germany in 2017. The recorded 7 subjects were these. The data recorded was done in percentage. That's awkward. Change this. You don't even need to say it. Okay. I wouldn't even have talked about it here. Not necessary. Okay. All right. Let's move on. The 4 most popular subjects in this chart are PE, history, maths, and physics. PE was 22.9%, just 0.5% below was history. Maths was 19.5%, making it the 3rd most popular school subject, and physics was the 4th most popular subject with 18.1%. Biology, geography, and IT were the least popular subjects, not curriculums. The percentages of the mentioned subjects were 7.1, 6.4, and 3.7 respectively. Overall, PE was the most popular with 22.9%, and IT was the least popular with 3.7%. PE was the most popular because students were into sports and exercise. On the other hand, IT was the least popular because most pupils were not interested in computer-based information systems. Okay, so let's see. You did some things in this description that I liked, but there are certainly some problems that we have to talk about. Okay, so let's start paragraph by paragraph. I liked this. I liked these first 2 sentences. That was appropriate. Good job. I did not like the fact that you talked about this. It was unnecessary. Get to the point. You're going to tell us that everything is in percentages, so there's no need to put it in your introduction. Okay? Then, you essentially have here 7 subjects. Okay? Which, that's all you have to talk about. Just those 7 subjects. There's no comparison to like another year or anything like that. So it's a really simple pie chart. What that requires you to do is really extend the information and find connections between the different pieces of data. All right, so what do I mean? I mean, you need to locate things like this 22.39% is pretty much like 7 times higher than this, okay? So those are the kinds of connections that are meaningful. Or you could have talked about how there's like a 4% difference, over a 4%, almost a 5% difference between the first most popular subject and the 4th most popular subject. So these are some of the things you could talk about. All right, make those connections because you really have to extend this. You have to draw it out. It's not like those charts where there's so much information where you then have to group things together to save time and to economize, basically. Here you have to do the exact opposite. Okay, so those are some connections that I'd like you to make. Now let's talk about this. So what I saw was that you basically did some grouping, and I didn't really like this sentence here because it was really it just felt like a list. Look at this. PE was 22.9. Just X below was history. Maths was this, and physics was this. It's just a list, okay? And that's not analysis. That's not reporting. Okay, that's just listing essentially. So you needed to do a little more work here in terms of the language to show us that there's some analysis, there's some thought, there's some reporting happening here. Let's see if we can come up with something a little more along the lines of what I'm talking about. So PE was 22.9%, okay, making it the most popular subject, okay. It was followed very closely by history at 22.4%. Okay, then rounding out the top 4 subjects were history and maths, full stop. History was just under 20% at 19.5, whereas physics was somewhat lower at 18.1%, almost 5% lower than the most popular subject. Okay, so do you see what I'm doing? I'm just kind of making a little more intricate comparisons between some of these things, between some of these items. So that's what I wanted you to do. Now here, this is a perfect example of how this is just a list. Look at this. The percentages were this, 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 and this. And I really don't want you to do that. Okay, try to do something more along the lines of what I described just before. Now, let's look at your overview. All right, you wrote it as a conclusion. That's okay. You can do it. My personal preference is to have it here for a variety of reasons, but that's not the point. The point is that this isn't an overview. What you basically did was you just summarized, again, a lot of the information you just had, but that's not what an overview is supposed to do. An overview is not supposed to have data, and you did. It was full of data. Look, 22.9, 3.7, and not only did you do this, I didn't want data in the overview. Nobody wants data in the overview, but you also drew conclusions from information that was not given to you. We don't want to know why PE was the most popular subject. We don't want to know why IT was not the most popular subject. That information is not given to you. So don't assume, don't draw those kinds of conclusions. This kind of information really does absolutely not belong in a task 1, all right, where you're just making sort of assumptions about the data. And it certainly doesn't belong in an overview. So you're probably wondering, all right, Ellen, well, what would an appropriate overview have been? An appropriate overview would have been that the most popular subject in Germany was PE, and the least popular was IT. Done. That's it. Okay, and that's an overview. All right, so I hope that gives you information that will help you work on future task 1s. Let me know if you have any questions. Now let's take a look at online communication in the workplace. Let's see what you said. Ever since the COVID pandemic emerged, it has forced us to change our lifestyles. More so, people in the working class started to work from home, making online communication popular in companies. This essay will discuss both the advantages and disadvantages of online communication using examples from the Qatari government and Monash University. All right. So it's good in terms of the length. It's good in terms of the elements that you included. But I want to fix it a little bit in a variety of ways. Let's take a look at this. Ever since the COVID pandemic emerged, we have been forced to change our lifestyles. Specifically, not more so, and not just working class, because it's not talking about just working class people. It's talking about just everybody who works, okay? So don't say working class, because that has a specific kind of meaning. It sounds like you're limiting your audience here, who you're talking about. So it should have been, in fact, employees across the world have started to work from home, making online communication popular in companies. Now, you introduced a couple of elements here in this introduction that the essay didn't ask you to. You started talking about COVID, and then you talked about working from home. You didn't need to limit yourself like this. Okay, this is not just talking about the pandemic, and this is not just talking about working from home. It's just talking in general about how, rather than picking up a phone to discuss something with a colleague, we turn to online communications, whether that's email, whether that's Zoom meetings, whether that's Google Meets, whatever, okay? But we certainly don't run across the hall or run across wherever to meet up with our colleagues, okay? So I felt like you kind of limited this. Now, why is this important? Because it raises a red flag to me. And I wonder then, well, are you going to limit your arguments in your body paragraphs like this as well? Or are you going to understand that the issue is broader? So what it really affects is it affects your task achievement score. Okay? So while it's very nice, you don't want to limit yourself like this. Now, let's take a look at this sentence here. You said that you will discuss both advantages and disadvantages. Good. I'm glad. You have to discuss both advantages and disadvantages because it asks you if one outweighs the other. However, that's the question you need to be answering. If you're aiming to get a band 7, you absolutely must address this question and answer it. And the best place to do that is your introduction, because you want your position to be clear throughout the response. The best way, the clearest way to do that is to answer whatever question they pose to you in your introduction. Okay, so rather than just telling me you're going to discuss advantages and disadvantages, say this essay will describe why I believe X, and will discuss the advantages and disadvantages using etc., etc., etc. Alrighty, so let's move on. Firstly, telecommunications applications such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams have an option to screen share, so it is much easier than assembling specialized equipment to host presentations. Okay, what do you mean? Why is this important? Why does that make it more common than face-to-face communication? Secondly, meetings require a large space so that all staff can attend. However, when you are having an e-conference at home, you do not need to worry about that. Plus, an organizer needs to book a room in advance. For example, a survey conducted by the Qatari government visited QNB and asked a few questions to some of the employees. They concluded that 70% of the staff found it easier to have online meetings than physical meetings. All right, so the good news is that the grammar in this paragraph was good. I didn't have to correct anything. You saw that it read really rather easily. What's missing for me is I had to read the entire paragraph to kind of gauge what your central idea was. I want to remind you that having a clear central idea is very important to your score in coherence and cohesion. But I did have to read the whole thing. So what was missing for me in this essay was a very clear topic sentence in the beginning of your paragraph and a conclusion sentence to the paragraph, which would have essentially just wrapped it up and just referred essentially to the first sentence in the paragraph. So what could this have looked like? Rather than starting here with this communications, Zoom and Microsoft, you could have said that one of the advantages of telecommunication is the convenience that it provides. For example, applications such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams have an option to screen share, so etc., etc., etc. Okay, that would have been a better way to do this. All right, so let's move on. Also, I want to remind you, don't forget to have that kind of conclusion sentence here, which refers back to that first sentence. So let's go to your next paragraph. Firstly, what happened here? You said firstly here, and then here you have firstly, and on the other hand, you can't do this. You can't have firstly or on the other hand. You can't have firstly because you had firstly here, first of all. Second of all, you can't have on the other hand because you didn't have on the one hand here. So if you had on the one hand, here you could have had on the other hand. But here, both of these cannot be used, okay? So, you could have done something else entirely. You could have said, in contrast, in order to have a virtual conference, everyone needs to have a stable connection. There is always a possibility to have there's always a possibility of having internet issues. If the host disconnects, then the meeting ends abruptly. Secondly, it is difficult to gain the participants' attention. When participants are occupied with something else, the information shared through the call would not be fully absorbed. For example, a group of degree students from Monash University conducted an interview with 6 lecturers who had a webinar. They stated that they ran into connection errors because, since they lived in different locations, 4 of them had a strong connection, whereas the other 2 did not. Okay, so what you basically did here is this example here didn't really belong here after the secondly. It really belonged after this thing about the internet issues, etc., etc. So rather than putting it where you put it, I would have put it right before secondly, because this is actually what this argument supports. So I thought this was kind of strange. You had, argument 1 and then argument 2, and then you had support for argument 1 here. Put the support directly after the argument that it supports. Okay, so for me, this whole thing here really belonged up here before the word secondly. Now, having said that, I also think that the argument in secondly, this sentence, also needed support. Every time you have any main idea, okay, here you had two, you had this internet issues and then you had attention. Anytime you have a main idea, in this case too, both of them need support. All right. So don't just use one piece of support when you have two separate ideas to justify your position. Okay. Each one of those requires its own piece of support. Okay, let's move on. In conclusion, virtual meetings bring advantageous benefits. That's redundant. Advantageous and obviously, so it just brings benefits. Yet there are drawbacks. No, hold on. In conclusion, virtual meetings bring benefits, yet there are drawbacks as well. Full stop. As a result, this is really way too informal. That's why I'm changing it, okay? As a result, it is clear that the disadvantages surpass the advantages. The flaws should be given more attention to make online meetings more suitable. Okay, that's fine. I thought that was really informal. It's certainly not the kind of language that I know that you've, been reading about both in the course and watching the videos and so forth, and, through the template. So I would have liked to see something more along those lines, which is certainly nice formal language that's appropriate to this kind of task. But this was both grammatically incorrect and just felt really, really informal. Okay, so go ahead and correct these, return them back to us corrected, and let's see another set of essays from you, okay? We'll be waiting, so go ahead and get that started. Good luck.